guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about some of the books I've been reading recently, many of which have been really great. I did realize the other day that my 2021 reading has gotten off to a slower start than I would have liked, which has gotten me thinking a little bit about wrap-ups and how reading with monthly wrap-ups in mind, or even just putting the effort into a monthly wrap-up, is maybe not the best use of time or energy. Maybe there are better or more interesting ways to be talking about the books that I'm reading, or maybe there are just better ways to be doing monthly wrap-ups. I'm not sure. Just something I've been thinking about recently and will continue pondering. Fortunately though, I do really enjoy doing wrap-ups when all of the books that I've been reading have been really fantastic and worth talking about. And apart from a 2-star historical romance that I'll talk about at the end, all of the books that I'm here to talk about today were excellent in one way or another, and I could honestly see some, if not all of them, ending up on my favorite books of the year list in December. So with all of that rambling out of the way, let's get into it. First up, I have Exhalation and Stories of Your Life and Others by sci-fi legend Ted Chiang, which are 2 short story collections that together comprise nearly all of Ted Chiang's published writing. Most of the stories in these books were originally published elsewhere in various sci-fi magazines and journals starting in the early 90s. And so because of that, Stories of Your Life and Exhalation do kind of read like Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Ted Chiang's collected works, rather than, say, books that were conceived as their own individual projects. And so for that reason, I thought I would just talk about Ted Chiang's stories on the whole, rather than distinguishing too much between one volume or the other. And on the whole, Ted Chiang's stories are just genuinely wonderful. I had such a great time reading them, and I'm now kind of upset with myself that I just blew through all of his existing work in a matter of a couple of months. And I'm not a big sci-fi reader at all. Most of my reference points for sci-fi tend to be movies and TV, things like Black Mirror and Blade Runner, which almost invariably seem to present a fairly dark dystopian worldview. And so part of what I found so wonderful and surprising about Ted Chiang's stories were the extent to which they expanded my conception of what sci-fi can be, and also just how gentle and generous and emotionally tender they are. The settings and concepts in these stories range from time travel in medieval Baghdad to a reworking of the biblical Tower of Babel myth, to the creation of golems and Victorian steampunk, to debates about beauty discrimination on college campuses, to existential climate crises on a non-human planet. And where I think a lot of the sci-fi I've encountered in the past derives its power and punch from this underlying sense of fear or dread, or from revealing just how bad technology can be, so many of Ted Chiang's stories, in contrast, are surprisingly hopeful and humanistic and generative, and so many of them left me feeling like my humanity had been expanded and like my mind and soul had both grown 3 sizes from having read them. Just as a couple examples, The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate is a time travel story about the acceptance of fate, in which, quote, "Past and future are the same and we cannot change either, only know them more fully." And Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom is a story that looks at parallel selves and parallel timelines, but that is also ultimately an exploration about how who we are is less a matter of any one particular big decision and more an accumulation of all the small choices that we're making in every moment of every day. And I found that kind of quiet wisdom to be such a balm while reading. And there's also so much more going on in these stories in terms of free will and determinism and religion and faith and Ted Chiang's economical but incredibly inventive world building. But I do want to do a full Ted Chiang video at some point, so I will leave it at that for now. But if you have read any Ted Chiang, I would love to know what your favorite stories of his are. I would say mine are probably The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, The Tower of Babylon, Hell is the Absence of God, Omphalos, and Anxiety is the Dizziness of Freedom. And if you haven't read Ted Chiang, I would obviously strongly encourage you to do so. And if you're like me and you aren't a regular sci-fi reader, I might suggest starting with Exhalation first, just because I think it's ever so slightly more accessible than Stories of Your Life, which has a handful of stories that are a little bit more hard math and sciencey, but you really can't go wrong with either one. Next up, I have Firekeepers' Daughter by Angeline Boulley, which is a very buzzy YA novel that came out earlier this spring. It was a Reese's YA book club pick and a #1 New York Times bestseller. And although I don't normally gravitate towards YA, I did see a number of Bookstagram posts and reviews of this that encouraged people to pick it up, YA reader or not. And so I took that recommendation to heart, and I'm so glad I did, because this was just a really fantastic read. The story is set in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and a nearby Ojibwe reservation, and it follows 18-year-old Donis Fontaine, who is Ojibwe on her father's side, white on her mother's side, and although she is not an enrolled member of her tribe, she has very much grown up within and is a part of that native community. And after an initial setup that introduces you to Donis and her friends and family and community members, and a new hotshot hockey player in town, Donis witnesses a horrible crime and is subsequently roped into this investigation into a new kind of meth that is being made and distributed in Sault Ste. Marie and across the upper Midwest. So this is a fairly plotty and pacey book, and while the crime thriller elements of the novel certainly give it a sense of structure and shape, at its heart, I would say it is still primarily this beautifully wrought coming-of-age story. And it does read like YA in the sense that we are following this young woman on the brink of adulthood who is coming into herself, but it's also a book that touches on some pretty dark and serious subject matter, and you never get the sense that Angeline Boulley is watering down anything for the reader. It all feels very honest and faithful to the experiences of these characters, and the way that she explores things like grief and family and culture and identity and inheritance and power and justice, all of that is done so well and with such nuance. And I also have to say, the way that Angeline Boulley explores and depicts community in this book was probably the high point of this whole reading experience for me. She creates such a rich, full world, and you really get a sense not only of every individual character that makes up Donis's community, but also all of the relationships and dynamics at play within it, and also this overwhelming sense of the responsibilities that are inherent in being part of a strong community. And because of that incredibly effective and immersive world building, so to speak, when characters in this community fail each other or betray each other, it feels like a genuine gut punch. And then on the other hand, when characters really come through for each other, it is just this feeling of overwhelming electric joy. And I will say, without giving too much away, there were a few distinct moments in the book related to the idea of community that got me kind of teary and emotional in a way that I wasn't expecting. One of them has to do with a conversation that Donis has with another character about the idea of a place being kept for someone at a table somewhere. One of them is a scene between Donis and the elders in her tribal community, and the last one is a scene at a powwow towards the end of the book where you just really get a sense of how far Donis has come throughout this whole story, and it's just incredibly moving and effective. So anyway, this was really just the kind of book that reminds you of why you fell in love with reading as a kid, and I definitely encourage everyone to go check it out, even if you aren't typically a YA reader. Shifting gears a bit, next up I have Playing Indian by Philip J. Deloria, who is a professor and academic currently teaching at Harvard. He is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, tribe, and he is also the son of activist Vine Deloria Jr., who famously wrote Custer Died for Your Sins, an Indian manifesto in the late 60s. Playing Indian was Philip Deloria's first book. It was originally published in 1998 by Yale University Press, and it looks at America's long and troubling history of settlers and non-Native Americans co-opting indigenous dress, tools, customs, culture, and language, and beyond that, imagining a kind of indigeneity both inside and outside the context of real Native American experience, all in service of working out a kind of unique white American identity. In the introduction, Deloria writes that for white Americans, quote, "The performances of Indian Americanness afforded a powerful foundation for pursuits of national identity. Although these performances have changed over time, the practice of playing Indian has clustered around two paradigmatic moments: the revolution, which rested on the creation of a national identity, and modernity, which has used Indian play to encounter the authentic amidst the anxiety of urban, industrial, and post-industrial life." This book really cracked my brain right open. I feel like issues of appropriation regarding Native American tribes and nations often in the mainstream media tends to center around Halloween costumes, mascots, and things like jewelry and clothing that co-opt Native arts and designs, which are all incredibly problematic and offensive just on the basic level of how they disrespect and dehumanize Indigenous people. But what this book does is really provide a whole lot of incredibly layered and illuminating historical context for this long American tradition of exploitation and appropriation. And it illustrates just how deep and insidious and self-serving the roots of those practices are. I really feel like this is the kind of book that should be included on a general America 101 syllabus. It has already completely recontextualized and deepened my understanding of what I thought I knew about American mythology, costumes and reenactment, or even the origins of American summer camp and white Americans' relationship with nature and the wilderness, and even more generally a sense of the authentic. I also think that the best kinds of academic history books are the ones that, even when they're looking at a fairly specific topic, are nevertheless able to illuminate the broader historical shifts and movements and eras that serve as the backdrop to the questions that they're pursuing. As an example, I feel like I came away from this book with a much stronger grasp on just the general concept of modernity writ large, which is great. It is a bit dense and academic, but at the same time, Phil Deloria writes so beautifully and with such clarity and confidence that even though it was slow going at times, it was just an incredibly rewarding reading experience. And even if you're not someone who finds yourself inclined to read academic history books in their entirety, I would still really encourage you to check out even just the introduction to this book, which lays out a lot of its key ideas and themes. And I'm also going to link some Phil Deloria articles and lectures down below. He's an incredibly charismatic and engaging speaker, and I think his lecture about who gets to write history in particular is a great watch. Is this a Phil Deloria Stan account now? Maybe so. Either way, I encourage you to go and check him out. And lastly, capping things off with this month's edition of Claire Reads Romance. Last month I read A Rogue by Any Other Name by Sarah MacLean as part of my ongoing journey into historical romance. For some context, I've been listening to some episodes of the Fated Mates podcast, which is hosted by Sarah MacLean and romance critic Jen Prokop, and I really recommend it if you're interested in the genre. Not only do Sarah and Jen have great romance recommendations spanning all different kinds of tropes and subgenres, but they're also such longtime romance readers that they're really able to contextualize different books and trends and eras within the romance genre, which is really fascinating and speaks to just how expansive the genre is. But anyway, because Sarah is a historical romance writer, they do talk about historicals quite a lot on the podcast, and in a way that makes me want to like historical romance more than I do at this moment in time. So I picked up one of Sarah's books, A Rogue by Any Other Name, in which a fallen aristocrat Michael kidnaps his childhood best friend Penelope in order to gain back his ancestral land, which is now a part of her dowry. So yeah, not a great start to things, but you know, over-the-shoulder kidnapping is fine because Penelope secretly wants to live a more exciting life anyway, so this is actually a great opportunity for her. This is why I struggle with historical romance. But despite the questionable premise, I did actually like the first half of this book. I thought the banter was really good, it was pretty sexy, but then in the back half, things just completely fell apart. It almost felt like I was reading a completely different book. It just got so flat and repetitive and frankly dumb, and I think that that's partly because Sarah MacLean was trying to do too much in this book. Like, let me count the tropes. You've got marriage of convenience, the we're married but are we gonna fall in love trope, there's the fallen hero, let me fix him bad boy trope. It also weirdly kind of has the fake dating trope because for part of the book, Penelope is trying to get Michael to re-enter society and pretend that their marriage is actually a love match instead of a kidnapping. And then there's the friends to lovers, childhood best friends thing. Even though while Penelope pines for the old Michael, who she knew when she was 12 for the entirety of the book, when you get Michael's perspective, you honestly would not know that Michael hadn't just met Penelope like last Tuesday. So yeah, it just has a lot going on, but all of it feels like halfway done and not very focused. And then on top of that, having a hero whose only personality trait is seeking revenge is not that compelling. So yeah, another swing and a miss for me and historical romance. I probably will give Sarah MacLean another try at some point just because I know so many people love her books, and I think I'll also give Tessa Dare a try sometime in the near future just because I've heard her books are more in the rom-com vein of historical romance. But wish me luck and feel free to send other recommendations if you have any. Before I head out, I wanted to mention that this video is kindly sponsored by Skillshare, which is an amazing online learning platform offering thousands of courses for creative and curious people who are looking to develop their passions and expand their skills, whether that be writing and journaling or graphic design and video editing. I recently took a Skillshare class called Writing Character-Driven Short Stories, taught by none other than Yun Lee, whose work I love and have talked about in previous videos on this channel. And this class was a fascinating look into her writing process and also had a lot of really great insights into how to develop a character, how to turn particular situations into stories, and then more general thoughts about things like publishing and inspiration. Skillshare classes are designed to fit your busy schedule. It's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and it's curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads and they're constantly launching new and exciting premium classes for you to explore. So if you're interested in exploring your creativity through Skillshare, the first 1,000 people who click on the link in the description box below will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Thanks to you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!